never imagined I would one day sit here, speaking into the void as though confessing to an unseen friend. But my story has weighed on me for far too long to remain buried. My name is Helena. I'm 41 years old, and I grew up believing that family was an unbreakable bond, a kind of sacred thread that could never snap, no matter how tight life pulled at it. For most of my childhood, my older brother, Matthew, was my hero. He was 2 years older, tall and confident, the kind of boy who seemed to carry the entire world in his stride. I adored him. I followed him around the yard, shared my secrets with him, and when our parents fought, it was him who whispered, "Don't worry, Lena, I'll always protect you." That promise stayed with me, stitched into the fabric of my life like a hidden seam I relied on without ever checking its strength. Maybe that's why. When the call came, when whispers reached me that Matthew had gotten married and I hadn't even been invited, the world didn't just shift, it collapsed, because betrayal by strangers is painful. But betrayal by the very person who once swore to shield you, it's a wound that doesn't stop bleeding. At first, I thought there must have been some mistake. Surely he'd forgotten. Or maybe the invitation had gotten lost. But when I asked my cousins, they confirmed it with uneasy faces. Everyone in the family had been there, everyone except me. They had eaten, danced, toasted to his new life. And me, the sister who had once patched his scraped knees, who had held him after his first heartbreak, who had been the last person awake with him in the hospital the night our father nearly died, I had been cut out, not only from a celebration, but from his life. I remember the night I found out. I was sitting in my apartment alone, poring over work emails, when my phone buzzed. It was a picture from my cousin Rachel, a wide shot of Matthew in a tuxedo, standing beneath an arch of white roses, holding the hand of a woman I'd never seen before. She had a delicate smile, but her eyes looked sharp, assessing. I froze, staring at the image until my vision blurred. My throat tightened, and I could barely breathe. I scrolled through the pictures Rachel sent Matthew dancing, laughing, our aunts clapping with joy, my mother beaming as though her heart was whole. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. A part of me screamed to call him, to demand an explanation, but another, quieter part held me back, whispering that the truth, whatever it was, would not be the kind I wanted to hear. I turned off my phone, but the images were already burned into me. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, replaying every memory, every conversation, trying to trace back the thread that had led here. The truth is, fractures had been forming long before this. Small cracks that I had ignored, thinking time or love would mend them. When our father died 5 years ago, Matthew changed. He became colder, more guarded. He inherited the house, while I received a small portion of money. At the time, I didn't question it after all. He was the eldest son, and I had always thought the house was his by right. But soon, family dinners became strained. He stopped calling as often, and when he did, there was an edge to his voice, as though every word carried a weight he resented. Our mother tried to soothe me, saying, "It's just stress. Lena, he's figuring out his life. Give him time." And I did. I gave him time, patience, forgiveness. I attended his birthdays, showed up for holidays, brought gifts and cooked meals. But somewhere along the way, I noticed his new circle of friends, his new girlfriend people who looked at me like I was an intruder. I brushed it off, told myself I was imagining things. But now, as I stared at those wedding pictures, I realized I hadn't been imagining anything at all. They had erased me, and Matthew had let them. For weeks after, I avoided family gatherings. I stopped answering calls from my mother, who begged me to just come over and talk. My heart was too raw. I felt like an orphan, though my mother was alive and my brother just a few miles away. Betrayal has a way of making even familiar faces look like strangers. It wasn't until Thanksgiving rolled around that I finally caved. My mother called me, her voice breaking. "Please, Helena, just come for dinner. For me." Against my better judgment, I went. I walked into the house where I had grown up, a place that once smelled of cinnamon and safety, only to feel the air change as soon as I crossed the threshold. Matthew was there with his new wife, Claire. She was beautiful, polished, her hair in perfect waves, her hands heavy with rings. She greeted me with a smile too sweet to be sincere. "Helena, finally," she said, her voice dripping honey. "We've heard so much about you." I wanted to ask her what she had heard. Lies, half-truths, I bit my tongue. Dinner was a strained affair. Conversations hushed when I entered a room, and when I tried to join, Claire would smoothly redirect, leaving me on the outskirts like a ghost. My mother tried to keep the peace, fussing over dishes, pretending everything was fine. But I caught her eyes once wet, pleading, and I knew she was caught between her children, torn apart silently. It was after dinner, when the dishes were cleared, that I finally asked Matthew, my voice shaking, "Why didn't you invite me to your wedding?" The room went silent. Everyone froze, their eyes darting between us. Matthew's jaw tightened. He looked at me, not with anger, but with something worse, indifference. "Because I didn't want you there," he said simply. The words hit me harder than any slap could. I felt the air rush out of me. "Why?" I whispered. He exchanged a glance with Claire, who placed her hand on his arm as though steadying him. "Because you've always been a problem, Lena. You cling. You make everything about you. I didn't want you ruining my day." It was as if my world shattered into glass. My knees went weak. I laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Ruining your day, I've only ever loved you. Matthew, I've only ever been there for you." But he didn't flinch. His silence was louder than any words. I left that night without looking back, though my mother called after me. I drove home with tears blinding me, my hands shaking on the wheel, and as I pulled into my empty driveway, a strange resolve settled over me. If they thought I was weak, if they thought they could erase me, they were wrong. The truth of our family, our father's inheritance, the secrets buried in that house, the lies Matthew had spun, was tangled far deeper than Claire or anyone else knew. And if they wanted me gone, they had underestimated me. Because betrayal cuts deep, but it also awakens something fierce. And I knew then I would uncover the reason behind my exile, even if it destroyed what little family I had left. The days that followed my confrontation with Matthew were some of the darkest I'd ever lived through. I wandered around my apartment like a ghost, replaying his words over and over until they hollowed me out. "You've always been a problem, Lena." The cruelty of it gnawed at me because I couldn't reconcile it with the brother I had grown up with. The boy who once tied a bandana around my scraped knee and told me I was stronger than I thought. But grief has a strange way of peeling back layers you've ignored. Once the pain settled into a dull throb, I began noticing small details from the past that I had brushed aside. His coldness after our father's death, his evasiveness whenever money came up. The way Claire looked at me that night like she knew something I didn't. I couldn't shake it. Something about the way she rested her hand on his arm when I asked about the wedding. Something about the smugness in her eyes. It told me that my absence wasn't just about me being a problem. It was about something bigger. Something they didn't want me to know. That suspicion became a seed, and seeds grow quickly when watered with betrayal. I decided to visit our childhood home, the one Matthew had inherited. I told myself it was just to see my mother, but really, it was to walk through those rooms again, to search for answers hidden in walls that had heard everything. When I arrived, my mother looked tired, older than her years. She hugged me with trembling arms and whispered, "Please don't fight with your brother again." But I wasn't there to fight. I was there to listen. While she busied herself in the kitchen, I wandered through the house. Every corner carried echoes of our childhood, the dent in the staircase, from when Matthew pushed a toy car too hard. The faded wallpaper in the hall, where we had marked our heights each year. But it was in my father's old study that I felt a chill. The room smelled of dust and old books, the curtains drawn tight. I ran my hand along the shelves, remembering how my father used to sit here late at night, poring over papers. Something compelled me to open the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside, buried under old envelopes, was a folder. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. Inside were documents, legal ones. My father's will, except it wasn't the version we had all seen when he passed. This one was different. In it, the house wasn't left to Matthew alone. It was to be split between us equally. The money wasn't meant to be divided, as it had been, either. According to this version, I was entitled to far more than what I'd been given. I felt my chest tighten. This changed everything. Had Matthew hidden this? Had he lied to me? To our mother? To everyone? My mind raced as I tried to piece together the timeline. He had taken control so swiftly after our father's death. He had insisted he was handling the paperwork, that I didn't need to worry. And I, still grieving, had trusted him. I tucked the folder into my bag, heart pounding. As I left the room, my mother caught me in the hallway. Her eyes flicked to my bag, and for a moment, I thought she might say something, but instead, she sighed and whispered, "Helena, sometimes the truth only makes things worse." Her words haunted me. Did she know? Had she chosen silence to keep the peace? That night, I couldn't rest. I spread the documents out on my kitchen table, tracing my father's signature with my fingers, reading the lines again and again. The betrayal wasn't just Matthew's, it was my mother's silence, too. She had known I was left out of the wedding, and now, it seemed, she had known about this as well. I wanted to scream, to march to Matthew's house and throw the papers in his face, but something told me to wait. Anger would only get me dismissed again. No. This needed to be handled carefully. If Matthew had stolen my inheritance, there had to be proof beyond these papers. And if he and Claire had married without me present, Maybe their union wasn't built on love alone, but on secrets they were desperate to guard. The next few weeks, I started asking quiet questions. I spoke with an old family lawyer, pretending I was reviewing paperwork. I hinted at discrepancies, and his uneasy expression told me more than words. Sometimes wills get contested, he said carefully. It's not unusual for one version to be replaced. Replaced. The word lodged in my chest like a thorn. I started watching Matthew and Claire more closely at family events. They avoided me, but I noticed the tension in their eyes whenever I lingered too long. The way Claire's smile would falter when I asked about their plans. Once, as I was leaving, I overheard her hiss at Matthew. "She's digging. You need to stop her before she ruins everything." Ruins what? My suspicion grew into obsession. I began to piece together fragments, rumors from neighbors, a sudden influx of money that Matthew couldn't explain, investments that seemed far too grand for his modest job. And Claire, she came from wealth, but her family had disowned her years ago. Their union wasn't just romantic, it was strategic. And then came the night that shattered everything. I received a call from Rachel, my cousin. She hesitated, her voice trembling. "Helena, I think you should know something. Claire wasn't the reason you weren't invited to the wedding. It was Matthew. He told everyone that you were unstable, that you'd cause a scene. He said you'd ruin it, and he begged us not to tell you." My heart stopped. "He told you that?" "Yes," she whispered. "But there's more. I overheard him one night at the reception, talking to Claire's uncle. He was thanking him for covering things up. Something about the will. I don't know the details, but it didn't sound right." I sat in silence. The phone pressed to my ear, the world spinning. Everything I had suspected was true. Matthew had lied, manipulated, erased me, not because I was a problem, but because I was a threat to the life he had stolen. That night, staring at the ceiling in the darkness of my bedroom, I made a promise to myself. I would no longer be silent. I would no longer let my brother bury me under lies. I would dig up every truth, expose every secret, and make him face the family he had betrayed. But I also knew this revenge wasn't always about rage. Sometimes it was about patience, about letting the truth ripen until it was undeniable. And so I waited, biding my time, holding onto the documents like weapons, because I knew one day, the right moment would come, the moment when Matthew's carefully built world would collapse under the weight of his own deception. And when that day came, I would be ready. I wish I could tell you that after discovering the hidden will, I marched straight into Matthew's life and demanded justice, that I confronted him boldly, and he confessed with shame. But that's not how it happened. Betrayal like his doesn't dissolve under confrontation, it fights back. It hides deeper. It manipulates. I knew if I exposed what I had too early, he would twist the story, paint me as bitter, unstable, or worse. He had already planted those seeds in the family's mind. I couldn't give him more ammunition. So I waited. I observed. And with every family dinner, every strained conversation, the weight of what I knew pressed heavier on my chest. My mother, fragile and torn, seemed to exist in two worlds, one where she clung to the illusion of harmony, and one where she knew silence was complicity. Sometimes, when she looked at me, I could almost hear her apology in the quiet tremor of her breath. But apologies whispered in silence can't heal wounds made in betrayal. It was Christmas Eve when everything began to unravel. My mother insisted on hosting, as always. The house smelled of cinnamon and pine, but the warmth in the air was artificial, like a staged photograph of joy. Matthew and Claire arrived late, sweeping in with expensive coats and bags of lavish gifts. Claire's diamonds sparkled under the lights, a constant reminder of wealth and distance. We gathered around the table, and as the wine flowed, so did the conversations. I stayed quiet, watching. Claire dominated the room with her rehearsed charm, but Matthew was restless, his jaw tight, his eyes darting. I could sense the pressure building in him, the strain of carrying a secret too long. And then, out of nowhere, it happened. My mother, her voice quivering but steady, looked at him and said, "Matthew, it's time. You need to tell her." The room froze. Forks hovered in the air. My cousin Rachel, who had clearly known something, lowered her eyes. I felt my heart pound. "Tell me what I asked." My voice sharp. Matthew glared at my mother, his face pale with fury. "This isn't the time," he hissed, but my mother straightened her shoulders, her frail frame trembling with courage I hadn't seen in years. "There will never be a right time. Helena deserves to know the truth." I turned to her, my hands gripping the edge of the table. What truth? The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. And then she said it. "Your father never meant for Matthew to have everything. He changed the will before he died. He wanted you to share equally. Matthew knew. He found the papers. Her voice broke. He hid them." Gasps rippled around the table. Claire's face drained of color. Matthew slammed his fist down so hard the silverware rattled. "That's enough," he shouted. "You don't know what you're talking about." But I knew she did. I reached into my bag, my fingers shaking, and pulled out the folder I had been carrying for weeks. I placed it on the table and slid it toward him. "You mean these papers? The ones you buried?" The room went silent again. But this time, the silence had a weight to it, a sharp, undeniable truth pressing down on everyone. Matthew's face turned crimson. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cracking. "I did what was best for everyone. Dad wanted me to take care of things. You wouldn't have known what to do with the house, with the money. I protected you." "Protected me?" My voice trembled with rage. "You erased me. You stole from me. You lied to everyone, made them believe I was unstable, that I didn't deserve to stand beside you on the most important day of your life. Protected me. No. Matthew, you betrayed me." My words hung heavy, and for once, no one rushed to soften the blow. Not even my mother. She sat in silence, her face a portrait of grief and guilt. Claire tried to speak, her voice thin. "It's not what you think," but I cut her off, my anger finally spilling free after years of silence. "It's exactly what I think. You married him knowing he built this life on lies, and you stood there smiling while he cut me out of my own family." The tension exploded then. Relatives argued, voices overlapping, accusations flying. Matthew shouted about responsibility, about being the eldest son, about carrying the family. I shouted back about fairness, about truth, about the sacredness of trust. My mother wept quietly, her frail hands folded in her lap. In the chaos, a strange clarity washed over me. I realized that no matter how much I fought, no matter how much evidence I had, Matthew would never admit his guilt freely. He was too far gone, too entangled in his pride and deceit. But what I had now, the documents, the witnesses, my mother's confession was enough. Enough to expose him not just in whispers, but in court if I chose. Enough to shatter the image he had built of being the golden child, the rightful heir. That night, I left the house not with tears, but with resolve. I had carried the weight of silence for too long. It was time to shift the burden back where it belonged on him. The weeks that followed were a blur of consultations with lawyers, endless conversations with extended family, and tense phone calls from Matthew, demanding I drop everything. He threatened, he pleaded, he tried to twist the narrative as always. But for the first time in my life, I didn't waver. And then came the day of reckoning. The family gathered again. This time, not for celebration, but for confrontation. With the will exposed, with witnesses ready to speak, the truth could no longer be buried. Matthew tried to defend himself, but the walls he had built began to crumble. Relatives who once adored him turned their eyes away, ashamed. My mother, though frail, stood beside me, her trembling hand clutching mine. It wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't even about the house. It was about something deeper, the restoration of truth, the reclamation of a bond I thought was unbreakable until he broke it himself. As I stood there, watching Matthew's carefully crafted world collapse, I felt both heartbreak and vindication. I mourned the brother I had once loved, the boy who had promised to protect me. But I also felt a strange peace, knowing that for once, the lies weren't winning. Still, I wondered, would revenge ever truly heal me, or would it leave me hollow, carrying scars that no victory could erase? The answer would come later, in ways I didn't expect. I stood in that room, watching my brother unravel piece by piece, and I realized something both tragic and freeing. There was no going back. The moment Matthew chose deceit over love, he severed the thread that tied us as siblings. Even as he tried to shout, to claw his way out of accountability, there was a finality in the air. He knew. I knew. And now the whole family knew that the pedestal he had stood on all these years was nothing more than sand, and it was collapsing beneath him. The days after that confrontation moved like a storm sweeping through the family. Relatives called me, some offering apologies for doubting me, others asking in hushed voices how Matthew could do such a thing. Whispers spread, and I could feel the shift. The golden boy was no longer untouchable. The family's loyalty was fractured, their admiration replaced by suspicion. But for me, it wasn't triumph. I felt it was grief. For nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering the boy who once carried me on his back, the teenager who had defended me from bullies. I couldn't reconcile that boy with the man who had lied, stolen, and cut me out of his life. And yet, maybe that was the cruelest part of betrayal. It doesn't erase the love that once existed. It only poisons it. leaving you with a wound that will never close cleanly. My mother grew weaker in those months. The weight of years of silence bore down on her. One evening, I sat by her side, holding her hand as she whispered, "I thought I was protecting both of you. I thought if I stayed quiet, you'd find your way back to each other. But silence is a lie too, isn't it?" Tears welled in my eyes as I squeezed her hand. "Yes, Mom, but you don't have to carry it anymore. The truth is out now." She nodded, her eyes glistening. And in that moment, I forgave her not because she hadn't failed me, but because I could see how much she had failed herself. A mother who watched her children fracture and couldn't hold them together carries a wound far deeper than mine. Meanwhile, Matthew retreated. He stopped attending family gatherings. When he did appear, he was distant, his once proud shoulders hunched, his wife clinging tighter to him than ever. I heard whispers that his finances were unraveling, that the investments he had made were failing, that the foundation of his new life was crumbling under the weight of his greed. And here's the truth: I didn't have to destroy him. Life did it for me. Karma, slow and unrelenting, began to strip him of everything he had stolen. One day, I received a letter. Not a call, not a visit, a letter. It was Matthew's handwriting, shaky and unsteady. Inside, he didn't admit guilt directly, but I could read the cracks between the lines. "I don't expect forgiveness," he wrote, "but I want you to know I never hated you. I only feared losing control. And I see now, in trying to protect myself, I lost you instead." I cried when I read it, not because it healed anything it didn't, but because it was the closest he had come to an apology, and maybe the closest he ever would. Months later, the house our childhood home was finally sold, as the will had always intended. I received my share, but the money meant little. It couldn't buy back the years of trust lost, the nights of loneliness, the empty chair at his wedding that should have been mine. But what it did give me was closure, proof that I hadn't been invisible, that my father's love for me had been real, that I had been robbed but not erased. I stood outside that house one last time before the keys changed hands. The walls were faded, the garden overgrown. But as I ran my hand across the doorway, I felt both sorrow and release. This was where our family had begun, where we had laughed and fought and dreamed. And though betrayal had poisoned its ending, I refused to let it take away the beauty of what once was. The greatest lesson I learned through it all was this: betrayal changes you, but it doesn't have to define you. I could have let Matthew's choices turn me bitter, but instead, I chose to let them make me stronger, strong enough to demand the truth, strong enough to let go of the illusion of family and embrace the reality that sometimes the people meant to protect you will harm you. And sometimes the family you need isn't the one you're born into, but the one you choose. As for Matthew, I don't know if we'll ever truly reconcile. Maybe in another lifetime, on another path, we would have grown old as siblings who leaned on each other. But in this life, our story ended the moment he chose deceit over love. And yet, I don't hate him. Strange as it may sound, I hope he finds peace. Because carrying hatred is just another form of chain, and I've carried enough chains in my life. So, if you take anything from my story, let it be this: the truth will always rise, even when buried under lies. Betrayal may cut you open, but it can also carve out space for something greater: strength, clarity, and freedom. I tell my story not to wallow in the pain, but to remind anyone listening that you are not powerless when others try to erase you. You have the right to stand, to speak, to demand to be seen, and no one, not even the people you once trusted most, has the power to take that away from you. If my father were alive, I think he'd tell me he was proud not of the inheritance or the fight, but of the courage to finally stand in my truth. And for me, that is enough. So, I close this chapter, scarred but standing. And though my brother's betrayal shook our family to its core, it also revealed the truth that can no longer be hidden. Thank you for walking through this painful journey with me. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it, to leave your thoughts in the comments, and to follow along for more stories like mine. Sometimes, sharing is the only way we heal together.